There are moments in every human life when the noise of the world grows unbearable, when the voices of others, though kind, though well-meaning, no longer reach us. It is as if something within withdraws behind an invisible veil, refusing all contact, demanding silence. To most, this silence feels like abandonment, a terrible exile from the warmth of human connection. But to a few, to those whose souls are being prepared for a deeper encounter, this withdrawal marks not the end, but the beginning of something sacred. Solitude is not chosen lightly, it is chosen by the soul itself. It is not an escape from the world, but a descent into the depths where the true life of the psyche unfolds. When I speak of solitude, I do not mean loneliness in the social sense. Loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of oneself. Loneliness wounds, but solitude that transforms. It is the condition in which the individual begins to hear the faint voice that speaks beneath the clamor of daily life, the whisper of the self, the inner center of being that connects us to the eternal. Modern man fears this voice because it speaks a language that cannot be translated into efficiency or progress. It does not promise success, nor offer comfort. It asks for something far more dangerous. It asks for truth. To enter solitude is to enter into dialogue with the unknown within. It is to confront the images, emotions, and desires that have long been suppressed beneath the persona, the mask we wear before the world. This mask is necessary. It allows us to play our roles in the social order, but if one never removes it, one forgets the face beneath. Many people today live entirely through their personas, mistaking performance for authenticity. They are endlessly connected, yet profoundly disconnected from themselves, from meaning, from soul. They fill every silence with noise, every emptiness with distraction, terrified of what might emerge if they were to face themselves alone. But there comes a time when the soul rebels against this surface existence. A strange unease seeps through the cracks of ordinary life, a sense that something essential has been lost. The familiar pleasures no longer satisfy. The old ambitions turn hollow. It is then that solitude begins to call. This call is not gentle. It often arrives as crisis. A relationship dissolves, a career collapses, a long suppressed emotion surges to the surface. The outer structure of one's life breaks apart, forcing the individual inward. The rational mind resists. The ego clings to what was, but the unconscious has already begun its work. The soul will not be denied its evolution. In solitude, one meets what I have called the shadows, the rejected parts of the psyche that the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. These are not only our vices and weaknesses, but also our neglected strengths, our unlived passions, our forgotten innocence. The shadow is both terrifying and precious. It holds the energy of all that has been repressed in service of adaptation. When one is constantly surrounded by others, one can maintain the illusion of virtue, of coherence, of being good. But when the world falls away and only one's own reflection remains, the mask begins to crack. Then the hidden impulses speak anger, envy, longing, fear to the unprepared. This encounter feels like madness. But it is not madness, it is initiation. Every culture that has ever understood the soul has honored solitude as the necessary stage in the making of a human being. The shaman departs from the tribe to seek his vision in the wilderness. The prophet enters the desert. The mystic retreats into the cave. The pattern is ancient and universal. The separation from the collective precedes the revelation of the individual self. Without this separation, one cannot truly return to the community. One merely conforms to it. Individuation, the process by which one becomes who one truly is, requires solitude as the crucible in which the false self dissolves. We do not choose this path consciously. Often it is forced upon us by circumstances that seem cruel or meaningless. The loved one leaves, the world rejects us, fortune turns its face away. Yet, in hindsight, one sees that the soul was guiding all along, using the outer loss to awaken an inner necessity. The soul seeks wholeness, not comfort. It will sacrifice anything, reputation, success, even sanity for the sake of becoming real. That is why those who must walk this path alone are often misunderstood. Their solitude is not a failure of connection, but a preparation for it. Before one can truly love another, one must know who it is that loves. Before one can serve life, one must first meet life within oneself. In solitude, time changes its texture. The hours stretch open like deep water. The past, long buried, begins to stir. Forgotten memories rise like ancient fish from the bottom of the psyche. Dreams grow vivid and symbolic. One may dream of descending into dark caves, of wandering forests, of meeting strange figures who speak in riddles. These are not random images, but communications from the unconscious, guiding the ego through the terrain of the soul. Each symbol carries a fragment of lost meaning, a key to the inner architecture of being. To understand these images is not to analyze them mechanically, but to live them, to allow them to shape one's consciousness from within. And yet, solitude is not only a descent into darkness, it is also the place where one begins to sense a deeper order, an unseen intelligence moving through the chaos. When the noise of the outer world fades, the patterns of the inner world emerge with astonishing clarity. The psyche reveals itself as a living organism, self-regulating, purposeful, whole. Even the conflicts and contradictions that once seemed senseless begin to appear as part of a hidden symmetry. The light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, the masculine and the feminine. They are not enemies, but opposites seeking union. This union is the essence of the sacred, for it reconciles the split within the human soul. It is in solitude that the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine aspects of the psyche, first make themselves known. In the silence of the heart, one begins to hear the dialogue between these forces. The eternal lovers, whose union creates the inner marriage. This inner marriage is not the denial of outer love, but its foundation. Without it, relationships become arenas of projection, where each seeks in the other what they have not yet found within themselves. But when the inner opposites are reconciled, love becomes something entirely different, not dependency, but communion, not désir, but recognition, Thus, solitude purifies lover. It burns away illusion and leaves only what is essential. The one who has endured the loneliness of true self-confrontation no longer seeks others to fill the void. He seeks to share the fullness that solitude has revealed. He no longer demands to be understood. He understands. This transformation is not sentimental, it is alchemical. Solitude turns the lead of isolation into the gold of consciousness. It takes what was unbearable and makes it sacred. In our time, solitude has become a rare art. We are surrounded by means of constant contact, yet deprived of genuine communication. The individual is bombarded by information, but starved of meaning. We mistake connection for intimacy, stimulation for aliveness. The soul, overwhelmed by noise, retreats into numbness, but sooner or later, the call of the depths returns. It may come as depression, as anxiety, as a vague sense that one's life, however full, is strangely empty. These are not merely symptoms to be eliminated. They are messages from the unconscious inviting us to withdraw, to listen, to rediscover the forgotten conversation between the ego and the self, to accept solitude, then is an act of courage. It is to trust that the silence will speak, that the emptiness conceals a presence, that what feels like dying is in truth a form of birth. Every genuine transformation begins with this descent into aloneness. It cannot be bypassed or outsourced. The soul demands to be met directly, without intermediaries, without distractions. And when it is met, when one dares to look into the mirror of solitude and not turn away, something astonishing occurs. One discovers that one was never truly alone. For beneath the surface of the isolated self lies the vast communion of the collective unconscious, the timeless field in which all souls are rooted. To touch this is to know that solitude is not separation, but participation in a deeper unity. The modern person resists this mystery. He fears stillness as if it were death, not realizing that what dies in solitude is only the illusion of separateness. The true self is born only after this death. In the alchemical language, this is the nigredo, the blackening phase, in which matter dissolves before it can be transmuted into gold. Solitude is our psychological nigredo, the necessary darkness through which the light of consciousness is born. And so, when life calls you into aloneness, do not curse it. Do not rush to fill it with noise. Listen. Something ancient within you is awakening. Something that no crowd, no lover, no achievement can give you. You are being led to the source from which all meaning flows, the self, the eternal center of your being. The path will not be easy. The nights will be long, but if you endure them, you will emerge with eyes that see differently, with a heart that no longer seeks but knows. There is a peculiar moment in the solitary journey when one begins to perceive that what once appeared as isolation is, in truth, a communion with something invisible yet immensely alive. In the silence of solitude, the soul slowly awakens to the vastness of its own interior world. At first, this realization is unsettling, even frightening, for the ego senses that it is no longer the sole inhabitant of consciousness. The self, that mysterious totality which transcends our limited understanding, begins to reveal itself, not as a concept, but as an experience. It is here that one begins to sense a presence in the stillness, as if life itself were breathing through the quiet. The ancients called this presence God, or spirit, or simply the eternal. But I have found that it manifests psychologically as an unfolding dialogue between the ego and the unconscious. Solitude becomes the temple of this dialogue. One listens inwardly not to one's own thoughts, but to something deeper, older, infinitely wise. Yet before this communion can occur, the ego must relinquish its habitual certainties. The ego fears solitude precisely because it cannot control what it may encounter there. It prefers the known illusions of the outer world to the unpredictable truths of the inner one. But if one has the courage to remain, to stay in that stillness without running back to distraction, the fear slowly gives way to revelation. The shapes of dreams, the fragments of memory, the voices of intuition all begin to gather into a living pattern. The psyche, once obscured by noise, starts to speak in its native tongue the language of symbols. Each image that arises in solitude has its purpose. The serpent that appears in the dream, the child wandering through a forest, the light flickering in a dark cave. These are not arbitrary creations of fantasy. They are messages from the depths of the soul, seeking to guide consciousness toward integration. Solitude teaches us to listen to these symbols not with intellect, but with reverence. The unconscious speaks in poetry, not in prose. Its truths are veiled, for they must be lived rather than merely understood. But this encounter with the unconscious is rarely gentle. It often begins with disorientation, confusion, even despair. The old structures of meaning collapse. The outer world no longer reflects the inner one. Relationships that once seemed essential fall away, ambitions lose their fire. In psychological terms, the ego experiences a kind of death. It no longer knows who it is or what it wants. This crisis is not pathology, it is transformation. What is dying is the false self, the persona built to satisfy collective expectations. What is being born is the authentic individuality, the one who can stand before the mystery of life without pretense. I have observed that many people attempt to escape this stage by seeking constant company, by clinging to old roles, or by numbing themselves with work, pleasure, or ideology. They fear that if they surrender to solitude, they will vanish into meaninglessness. Yet the paradox is that only through solitude does the true meaning of existence begin to dawn. In solitude, one realizes that meaning is not given from without, but grows from within, like a flame kindled in darkness. It is often in this period of solitude that the archetypal images of the inner life begin to stir the great mother, the wise old man, the hero, the shadow, the divine child. These are not merely mythological figures, but living patterns within the human psyche. They emerge to guide the process of individuation. The great mother may come in dreams as a nurturing or devouring presence, reminding us of the duality of life and death. The wise old man appears as intuition, as a voice that whispers in times of uncertainty, urging patience and trust. The hero struggles against inner dragons, those forces of inertia, fear, and self-deception that keep the soul bound to its past. Each archetype speaks to a different dimension of the unfolding self. To live through these images consciously is to participate in the drama of the soul. It is no longer enough to read about myths or to interpret them intellectually. One must live one's own myth. Solitude provides the sacred space in which this can occur. The outer world often demands conformity. It rewards those who adapt, but the soul demands authenticity. And that demand can feel ruthless. It asks us to confront the question, who am I, when no one is watching? This question has haunted every sincere seeker since the dawn of humanity. It cannot be answered with words, only with being. Solitude compels this being. It strips away the masks and reveals the naked self, fragile, yet luminous. And when that self begins to speak, it does so with a voice that seems to come from beyond time, the voice of the eternal human, the one who has lived in all of us through all ages. It is in this dialogue between the temporal and the eternal that consciousness expands. One begins to perceive life not merely as a series of events, but as a symbolic unfolding of the psyche's evolution. Every joy and every sorrow, every encounter and every loss carries meaning. What once seemed like chance now appears as necessity. The soul does not move in straight lines. It spirals. Each return to solitude brings a deeper layer of understanding, a closer approach to the center, and what lies at that center, the self, the totality of all that we are, both conscious and unconscious, both light and shadow. The self is not an abstract ideal, but an experienced reality, a living presence that organizes and harmonizes the opposites within us. In solitude, we begin to feel its gravity drawing us inward. Like a star forming from cosmic dust, the ego resists this pull, fearing dissolution, but in truth, what dissolves is only its illusion of autonomy. The ego is not destroyed, it is transformed. It learns its rightful place as servant to a greater wholeness. Modern man suffers because he has lost this sense of center. He lives outwardly in his achievements, his possessions, his relationships, and measures himself by the world standards. But inwardly, if he is hollow, the soul is starved. And solitude, which could nourish it, is avoided at all costs. We fill every gap with entertainment, every silence with commentary, every pause with movement. Yet beneath the ceaseless activity lies a quiet despair, the faint awareness that we are not truly living, but merely performing life. When the individual finally turns away from this performance and begins to listen inwardly, the first thing he encounters is not peace but chaos. The unconscious rushes forward with its neglected contents. The mind becomes a battlefield of conflicting impulses, forgotten wounds, and forbidden desires. This is why solitude is often mistaken for suffering. It exposes the very things we have spent a lifetime avoiding. But to endure this exposure is to begin healing the psyche. Once allowed to express itself freely, begins to reorganize. the fragments of the personality, long scattered, start to align themselves around the new center. This is the birth of the self in consciousness. To reach this point requires faith, not faith in doctrine or dogma, but faith in the living process of the soul. The psyche is not our enemy, it is our teacher. Even its darkness conceals light. The task is to stay present, to remain in dialogue with what arises. No matter how unsettling, when we do so, the symbols that once frightened us begin to reveal their meaning. The shadow that seemed monstrous becomes a guardian of lost vitality. The loneliness that seemed unbearable becomes a portal to the divine. Ohne realizas, then that solitude is not punishment, but privilege. It is the womb of the spirit, the secret chamber where the alchemy of transformation takes place. It strips us of everything false so that we may emerge transparent to ourselves, and through ourselves to life. And perhaps after long years of this inner pilgrimage, one returns to the world. But one returns differently. The eyes see with a new depth. The heart moves with a quiet compassion. One no longer seeks to possess or to control, but simply to be in truth, in presence, in wholeness. Such a person carries solitude within them like a sacred flame. They can stand amid the noise of the world and remain inwardly still, for their solitude has become not isolation but communion with the totality of life. This is the paradox. Solitude, when lived fully, leads not to separation but to unity. The one who has met himself in the wilderness of the soul discovers in every face a reflection of the same mystery. He knows that beneath the surface of individuality lies the common depth of the human spirit. And so the one who has walked alone returns as a healer, not because he intends to heal, but because his very being radiates the peace of one who has reconciled his opposites. The path of solitude, then, is not for all, but for those whom the soul itself has chosen. It is the path of the deep individual, the one who must die to the collective dream in order to awaken to the inner reality. And so, if solitude calls, you do not resist. The call is sacred. It comes not to destroy, but to awaken. There comes a time in every soul's pilgrimage when solitude ceases to feel like an absence and begins to reveal itself as a presence. It is no longer a hollow space, but a living temple, filled with quiet intelligence and subtle light. What once seemed like isolation now feels like intimacy, not with another person, but with life itself. One realizes that the essence of all relationship begins here, in the capacity to commune inwardly, for it is impossible to meet another soul in truth if one has not yet met one's own. This, I believe, is why some souls must be alone first. They are being prepared, refined through solitude, so that when love finally comes, it does not come as possession or dependency, but as recognition. Such love is not born of need, but of wholeness. It is the meeting of two individuals who have each faced their own darkness and, through that ordeal, have learned to love the light and the shadow alike. Only then can two human beings truly see one another, not as projections, but as mirrors of the same divine mystery. In solitude, one learns that love is not a merging but a dialogue. It is a rhythm of approach and withdrawal, like the tide's movement between sea and shore. To love deeply, one must know how to stand apart, to remain rooted in one's own being, even as one opens to another. Otherwise, what we call love becomes only fusion, a collapse into the other, out of fear of emptiness. True love, like true individuation, requires distance as well as closeness. It is born not from the hunger to escape oneself, but from the courage to include oneself in the dance of life. Many people enter relationships not as individuals but as fragments, seeking completion. They hope that the other will fill what is missing, heal what is wounded, or silence what is afraid. But no one can do this for us. The loneliness we try to escape through another person only deepens when the illusion fades. Then we find ourselves disappointed, resentful, even despairing. Yet, this disappointment is not a failure of love. It is its initiation, for through it, so the psyche reveals the truth. No one can complete us, because we were never incomplete. We were simply unconscious of our own depth. To realize this, one must pass through the crucible of aloneness. It is here that we encounter the anima and the animus, those inner counterparts through which the soul mirrors its own wholeness. In dreams, visions, and relationships, these archetypes appear as figures of enchantment, drawing us toward love, beauty, wisdom, and sometimes destruction. They seduce the ego into projection so that it may eventually awaken to itself. When a man projects his anima onto a woman, he sees her not as she is, but as his soul imagines her to be radiant, mysterious, redemptive. Likewise, when a woman projects her animus onto a man, she invests him with qualities of power, intellect, or spirit that are her own unclaimed potentials. These projections are not mistakes. They are necessary illusions. They lead us toward relationship, which is the theater in which the psyche performs its dramas of growth. But eventually, the illusion must die, and this death is often excruciating. We awaken one day to see the beloved as human, flawed, complex, finite, and in that moment, something within us shatters. Yet it is through that shattering that the projection dissolves, and we retrieve our own lost image. We realize that what we loved in the other was a reflection of our own unlived life. Here lies the secret purpose of solitude. It prepares us for this recognition. It teaches us to see ourselves with compassion, so that when love comes, we do not demand that another carry our unloved parts. The one who has endured solitude can love without clinging, give without losing, and receive without fear. He or she has learned to hold the tension between longing and freedom, to love the other as an equal mystery, not as an answer to one's own incompleteness. And yet, solitude is not only preparation for love, it is love itself. In its most universal form, to be truly alone is to stand in direct relationship with existence. The trees, the wind, the sky, the silence, all become companions. one begins to feel that life itself is aware, that every atom carries consciousness. The distinction between the inner and outer world begins to blur. The self, which once seemed hidden within, reveals itself everywhere, in the rustle of leaves, in the gaze of a stranger, in the quiet movement of one's own breath. This is not imagination, but a change in perception. The ego has ceased its incessant grasping and has become transparent to the living reality of the psyche. One lives no longer as an isolated I, but as a vessel through which the eternal flows. Such a person is at home everywhere, even in solitude, for they have discovered the secret of belonging, that one belongs to the totality of life. Yet we must not romanticize this state. It does not come easily, nor is it permanent. The pendulum still swings. There will always be times when solitude feels heavy, when silence seems empty, when the inner voice grows faint. But these are not regressions. They are rhythms. The psyche, like nature, moves in cycles, contraction and expansion, night and day, solitude and communion. The wise learn to move with these tides rather than resist them. They understand that every descent into aloneness carries the seed of renewal, and every return to relationship deepens the meaning of solitude. If we look closely at the history of the human spirit, we see that all transformation begins with a descent into solitude. The prophets withdrew into the desert, the Buddha sat beneath a tree, Christ retreated into the wilderness, and even in myth, the hero must enter the underworld before he can return with the treasure. These are not merely religious stories, they are psychological maps. The descent into solitude is the necessary journey through the unconscious, the confrontation with the shadow, the surrender of the ego to the self. Without this descent, we remain bound to the surface of life, repeating patterns we do not understand. We live under the sway of unexamined drives, collective expectations, and inherited fears. But when solitude breaks open the surface, we begin to see the hidden architecture of our psyche. We realize that our suffering has meaning, that our conflicts are not punishments but invitations. Ach, neurosis. Each symptom, each painful repetition is the soul's attempt to make itself known. Solitude gives us the courage to listen to that message. To enter solitude consciously is to enter into dialogue with the mystery of existence. It is to say, I am willing to meet what is within me, even if it terrifies me. And when that willingness is sincere, life responds. The psyche begins to unfold like a flower turning toward light. The outer events of life begin to mirror the inner journey, and what once appeared as misfortune may reveal itself as guidance. The one who has learned to live with solitude no longer seeks certainty. He has discovered that the greatest truths cannot be possessed, they can only be lived. He knows that meaning is not found in grand revelations, but in the quiet rhythm of being intending to one's soul, in honoring one's inner images, in living authentically, even when unseen. Such a person may appear simple, even ordinary, to the world, yet in their presence one feels something rare, a stillness, a depth, a sense of quiet authority. They no longer speak from theory, but from experience, from the depths where words have become one with being. They embody what I would call the individuated soul, a person who is not perfect, but whole. And this wholeness, this reconciliation of opposites, is the ultimate fruit of solitude. It cannot be hurried or forced. It grows organically, like a seed in the dark soil. But when it blossoms, it brings forth a light that illumines not only the self but the world. So when life draws you into solitude, when you find yourself standing alone in the silence, uncertain and afraid, remember that you are not being abandoned. You are being initiated. You are being prepared to meet yourself, and through yourself to meet the divine mystery that lives within all things. And when that meeting finally occurs, when the veil of separation dissolves and you feel the pulse of life beating through you, you will know that you were never truly alone. For solitude, in its deepest sense, is not the absence of others, but the presence of the self, vast, radiant, eternal. And so I leave you with this question, one that perhaps each of us must answer in silence. When the noise of the world fades away and you are left face to face with your own soul, will you have the courage to listen to what it has been longing to say?